Hello, my name is Kalisa Marie Martin, aka Kalisa Marie Eats, and we are back with another episode of Food Sci Fridays. Last week we started off by talking about milk and its composition, and remember it has water, carbs, fats, and proteins, and of course those amounts will vary depending on the animal, but we're going to be focused on cow's milk. And today I'm super excited because we are going to be demonstrating one of the many ways that dairy can transform, and that's by becoming a foam. All right, so you might be thinking, what's she talking about? What is a dairy foam? Well, first let's start by defining any foam. And a foam is, by McGee's definition, a portion of liquid filled with air bubbles, a moist, light mass that holds its shape. Makes sense. So now that you've heard that definition, what are some dairy foams that come to mind? If you're picturing whipped cream, you're absolutely right. And another one is the milk foam that tops your lattes and cappuccinos and other fancy hot beverages. These foams are actually made two different ways. With the milk foam, it's the proteins holding them together. But with the whipped cream, it's actually the fat that's doing all the work. Let's start with the milk foam. Not only do milk foams allow for some cute designs on top of your hot beverage, but they actually act like a blanket to keep your drink hot and add some creaminess to it as well. Here's how it works. First, air has to get into the milk, either by agitating it or shaking it, or injecting it, like with a barista's steam nozzle. When this happens, the proteins collect in a thin layer around the pockets of air, isolating them and preventing the water in the milk from busting them. Because milk is only 3% protein, these bubbles are pretty fragile. But we can make them stronger. If we heat up the milk to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, not quite as hot as boiling, then the whey proteins surrounding the air pockets will unfold and bond to each other, stabilizing the foam. Because whey proteins are so important for the stabilization, it makes sense that milks fortified with extra protein are more easily foamed, like low-fat or fat-free milk. But on the other hand, a full fat foam, while maybe not as sturdy, will give you a fuller texture and flavor. So it's up to you. All right, let's make a foam. So a steamer would add the air and heat up the milk at the same time, but I don't have one of those machines, so I'm going to first add the air and then heat it up. I have about a cup of milk here that is in a container that can fit twice its size and just a tight fitting lid. And I'll just shaking it up. About 30 seconds or until it gets really frothy. You can see it's already doubled in size. Let's take a look at the foam. Ooh, take a look at this foam. It got really frothy really quick, but the bubbles are already popping, so we need to heat it up to stabilize it. But see how it already doubled in volume. All right, so I microwaved it for 30 seconds and look at the foam. The milk is nice and frothy. That foam is going to keep my drink warm. That's good. Okay, so that was fun. We're gonna be talking about another protein stabilized foam when we get to the egg chapter. Any guesses? Yes, a meringue. Meringue is a protein stabilized foam that's way more sturdy than this one. But for now, let's move on to the whipped cream. As you remember, whipped cream is a foam that is stabilized by fat. Here's how it works. Like the milk foam, the first thing that we have to do is incorporate air and then stabilize the bubbles. The most common way to do this is by whisking the cream either manually or with an electric mixer. If you've ever made your own whipped cream, you've noticed that it takes some time. The bubbles that form at first quickly deflate and you have to keep going. Here's why. To stabilize the bubble walls, we actually have to destabilize the fat globules. When we're whisking the cream, we're knocking them against each other, which strips away part of their protective membranes. You're probably already familiar with the idea that fat and water don't mix. So now these naked patches of fat are now avoiding contact with water and settling into two regions within the cream, either sticking to themselves or facing the pockets of air in the bubbles. And so by doing this, they're strengthening the bubble walls, making connections with neighboring walls, and preventing the pockets of water from moving very far. This network is how we have a more definite structure in whipped cream. Not sure what I'm talking about? Let's make it. First thing is that everything needs to be very cold. The cream, the bowl, and even the whisk. Because if the fat's not cold, it won't form a sturdy structure. Also, we're using heavy whipping cream, meaning it's between 36 to 40% milk fat. You need at least 30% milk fat, which would be a light cream, in order to be able to whip it. All right, so let's do it. I have about a cup of cream, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and about a teaspoon of vanilla. And I'm just gonna start whisking it. And depending on the recipe, it'll tell you how firm your whipped cream is supposed to be, but it could be anywhere from soft peaks to more firm ones, and I'll show you what that looks like. Did I mention you could use an electric mixer? But look, they're looking pretty good. You have some nice soft peaks. I'll show you a close-up. Nice and thick. We see our peak is pointing straight up. And again, depending on what you're using this for, that will determine how firm you want it to be. Now you're ready to go. You can add this to fresh fruit, pies, ice cream, or just eat it on its own. You might be thinking, great, the more I whip this, the better. Wrong. It is possible to over whip your cream. Remember, we just created this network, and if we push it past a certain point, the fat globules will continue to gather together and destabilize the bubbles. The clusters of fat become coarse, and the whipped cream gets really granular as the bubbles collapse. Any guesses for what you get when you over whip cream? Okay, I'll just tell you. If you continue to whip it, you'll eventually get butter. And that's what we're gonna cover in the next episode. Okay, so that's it for this episode of Food Sci Fridays. I hope you had a great time learning about dairy phones. See you on Wednesday for our live chat.